Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome. Appreciate you taking your time this morning. Obviously, we've got new forms that have come out, and we wanted to go over and cover and then answer your questions and concerns on it. Quick reminder, we moved our sales meeting till Tuesday uh, of next week, the 21st. And so we'd like to make sure you'd all be there via Zoom at 10 a.m. A few forms have changed, and we wanted to bring to your attention the new forms that have changed. Florida Realtors revised forms, and the list looks super long. However, many of them, some of the changes are just very, very, very minor. For example, it looks like the form numbers in the lower left-hand corner from CR6 to CR7, SPD3 to SPD R-4 have revised to either 1224 or 125. So just very minor changes there. An example is addendum P, that base payment disclosure. The form was changed from CR6 to CR7. And note the date on the form is going to be 10/21, which is still current. There are only 5 forms that have changed: the as-is contract, the standard residential contract, the addendum to vacant land contract, which is a new form in January of 2025, seller's property disclosure for residential only, and a condo rider. And this form obviously has the most changes to it. Okay, so we're going to start off with the as-is contract. In paragraph 9A, paragraph 9A, they have added seller disclosure services to the cost to be paid by the seller. Pretty simple. Paragraph 2, 9B, they've added buyer's closing costs to be paid by the buyer. Paragraph 9C is other evidence was added to line 159. Line 161, closing services were removed from being part of the collectively owners policy and charges as mentioned already in paragraph 9A. So very minor changes there. Line 168, you'll go there, Janine, through 170 have been added. Closing services shall have the meaning as described in the term section 627.77111A Florida statute, which is each party shall bear their own closing costs, closing service fees payable to closing agent, and the others provided each party may select one. Okay, so you got 1I and then 2 would be II is what I would call it. They've shortened the language for the seller and buyer to designate and pay for the owner's policy and charges under II, and III. It reads as follows: the seller shall designate closing agent and pay for owner's policy and charges. Buyer shall pay premiums for lender's title policy and endorsements. Buyer shall designate closing agent and pay for owner's policy and charges and premiums of any lender's title policy and endorsements. And then III does not apply because that is a Miami Broward Dade provision that doesn't affect us. Okay. Move to paragraph 8, 15A, buyer default. The last paragraph was deleted from the old contract that spoke about the portion of the deposit paid to the listing broker upon default by the seller be split equally between the listing broker and cooperating broker. The listing broker will now be able to keep the deposit paid by the listing broker as per the listing agreement. So you don't have to split the escrow with the other side any longer, if that should come to that. We were having to write in other, the riders FF and GG. They have now been added to the list, as you can see there. So you don't have to put it in, and the addendums obviously are in out files. All right. Line 641 and 642 in the old contracts mention MLS or other offer compensation, which has been removed to comply with NAR settlement, which makes sense. This line now reads, the contract shall not modify any offer to compensation made by seller or listing broker to the cooperating broker. Okay. The standard contract also has the same changes. So both contracts will have, the residential contract will have all the same changes in there. So we don't have to go over it again. The addendum to vacant land. This is a brand new form, kind of hot off the presses, 1st of January. And note the very first paragraph says, when initialed by all parties, parties acknowledge that they disclose set forth below was provided to the buyer prior to the execution of the vacant land contract between the parties, and the clauses will be incorporated. The best practice on this is if you have a vacant land, please upload this form into the MLS so the buyer's agent can provide to the buyer before writing a contract. Line 7, if a property is located with HOA dues, seller need to disclose here and check where the HOA is either voluntary or if it's mandatory. And I know we've had that issue in the past, so I think this is a nice change. Line 11 through 30 is standard language for a buyer to be aware if association has the right to prove a buyer the right of first refusal if association has the right of first refusal to buy the property, and buyer notification of application, transfer, initial membership fees charged by the association, along with who will pay the assessment amounts. Okay. Line 33 is where the seller would write in any pending assessments that they are aware of. Line 37 is where the seller writes any assessments that have not been assessed but have been reported in the minutes of the association within 12 months from the effective date of the contract. So you're going to be needing to get the minutes, and it's going to kind of stop on this. This has come up a lot of bit. A lot of the condo associations are creating portals to where the owners can go in and get these documents. If not, then it would need to come from the management company or the board. Okay, moving on, line 42 through 44 is the amount of dues, maintenance, or other fees currently being charged by the association. Lines 45 through 51 is a disclosure for damage to common elements, where any portion of the common elements is damaged due to fire, hurricane, or other catastrophe before closing. Either party may cancel the contract, or if the property appraises below purchase price and parties cannot agree on a new purchase price, or buyer elects not to proceed, or the association cannot determine the assessment. Attribute to the property for the damage at least 5 days prior to closing. Are the assessment determined or imposed by the association, attribute to the property for the damage to the common elements is greater than 1.5% if left blank. Lines 52 through 95 is language for HOA condominium rider B you're familiar with. Any questions? Okay, move forward. Seller's residential property disclosure. Once again, the form has been changed in the lower left-hand corner to SPDR4 revised 125. The only other change on this form is on page 4, where they've added P through T. Okay. P is the property located in a historic district. Q is the seller aware of any restrictions as a result of belonging to a historic district. R, are there any active or pending applications or permits with the governing body over the historic district? Are there any violations or rules to the properties in a historic district? T, if the answer to 10Q is yes, then you'll need to explain. The seller will need to explain. Questions?
You guys are awful quiet this morning.
Yes, they are. They probably read this already, but they're way ahead of us. Okay. The condo rider, A, the form with the most changes in it. And obviously, so with all the milestones, et cetera, that have happened, the new laws that are in process, and some that probably will be repealed, but we are where we are with it now. Okay, under paragraph 6, they've changed the buyer's entitled to seller shall at seller's expense provide buyer with current copies of the condo docs as well as the condo governance forms, which has really always been in there. So the best practices on this would be to upload to the MLS so buyer can have access when they're writing a contract so that they already have access to it. So we recommend the best practices is go ahead and upload it. The buyer will need to check boxes to request or not request copy of the current documents. Paragraph 10 is going to be milestone inspection report, structural integrity reserve, and turnover inspection reports. Okay, so this is the one that's got the most changes in it. So under 10A, seller needs to disclose by checking one box under A. I is required and has completed a milestone inspection report. See paragraph 10D below for violable rights, or II is not required to complete a milestone inspection, or III is required to complete a milestone inspection and has not been completed such inspections. Some have not got them because simply there's not enough people to do them. So very simple and clear choices for the seller to check a box. If they don't know the answer, and I know you've got a lot of guys have reached out to us on this, they should reach out to their association. Remember, this is a seller's disclosure, not your disclosure. So please make sure the seller is verifying the information they don't know. 10B, this is a turnover inspection report. This is where the seller needs to check the box I is required, if it applies, is required and has completed a turnover inspection for a turnover inspection performed on or after July 1, 2023. II is not required to have a complete turnover inspection report, and III is required to have a completed turnover inspection report not completed. So what does turnover inspection? Most condo buildings have already been turned over to the association. Many years ago, most probably the associations will not have the turnover information. I know, for example, my condominium is only going back 7 years. It was turned over in 1982. They're not going to have that. Therefore, the seller most likely 90% of the time is going to be 10B. II is not required. However, the property, if it is new construction, or for example, we're probably going to see and have seen apartments being turned over, older properties being converted to condos. This was where it would apply when 70% typically is the rule, are as to the condo docs. That's where this would apply to a older property. Also, as you know, if you're working with some of the developers, they're going to have their contracts as well. But on some new bills, this will be required. 10C, the structural integrity reserve study. Again, the seller needs to close by checking one of these boxes. I, if required and has been completed. II is not required. III is required and that has not been completed. 10, the structural integrity study falls under the milestone regulations, which we've discussed in the past, where the building is at least 3 stories high and 20 to 25 years old. 3 miles from the coastline every 10 years, 5 years from the coastline every 20 years. Okay, and 10D, if the buyer has checked the box, not the seller, the buyer only selects either that buyer acknowledges receiving copies of the milestone inspection summary, turnover inspection report, and structural integrity reserve report, if applicable, at these 3 business days, including weekends and legal holidays. Or signing the contract, or the buyer can cancel the agreement by providing written notice within 3 business days, including weekends and legal holidays, after signing the agreement and receive a copy of the milestone inspection reports. Turnover inspection reports or structural integrity reserve reports is applicable. This right to cancel cannot be waived. The buyer may also extend the closing by up to 3 days after receiving the reports if requested in writing. The buyer has a right to cancel, expires at closing. The rest of the condo disclosure is the same as the original. Okay, now, question. I know there's got to be questions on this.
Before we move forward with the questions, Sally, is there anything that you would like to say about any of these forms that we've just gone over? Any additional information from your side?
No, I think that was a really good explanation of what's required.
Okay. All right, so now questions from you. What questions do you have, especially on this paragraph 10 on the condo?
Are there any questions?
I have a question. I never have my seller sign the condo rider before the buyer fills it out. And I always get dinged for that in my compliance. So why would we have the seller sign all this until, the buyer checks everything?
Well,
Especially with assessments, like I've had to change my condo rider 3 times already because of assessments.
Mhm. It is the duty of the seller to disclose this information. Sally, is there something that you want to say about that?
Yeah, but like there's, is the seller going to pay the assessments in full? Is the buyer going to take the ones on after closing? That box is not checked and your seller's already signed it.
So I think that clearly there are some things that the buyer is going to choose as part of the offer, right? But especially with regard to paragraph 10, the seller needs to indicate at A, B, and C which of the
Right.
options is going to be applicable in
Right.
order for then the buyer to make the correct option or the option of their choosing at paragraph 10D. So I think it needs to be a combination of the seller needs to do some of them up front, and then the buyer's gonna make other selections just based on the nature of their offer.
Right. But I wouldn't have my seller sign because once the buyer signs, it's like executed, correct?
But they don't sign this, they just initial it.
Well, initial,
Yeah.
but once they initial it, it's executed. And maybe the seller doesn't agree with, the assessment portion of it.
And at that point, it would be an offer that the seller could then counter. So just like any other portion of the contract, if the buyer proposes a particular term or condition to the contract, the seller can always counter it. So if the seller completes, for example, 10A, B, and C, and then there are other options, like you were saying, is the seller going to pay the assessments in full, or is the buyer, those kinds of things. And then the seller could counter those terms and conditions.
Okay.
Both of those things are also addressed in the offer contract. I mean, there's a portion in the offer contract itself, as well as the condo writer, that talks about who's going to pay assessments after closing. So when they present the offer, they're going to have already checked a box. They would have corrected this if there was an inconsistency. It's a disclosure form that the seller initiates. I can't understand why they wouldn't sign it first.
Well, there is a provision in the contract that addresses assessments, but those are for assessments from a municipal or a county, like a governing entity. So
And doesn't-
different types of assessments.
And they really do not apply to the condo, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But the assessments for the condo, and lots of times they're divided up into 3 or 4 months and you're closing before. So, sometimes the buyer will agree to pay assessments after closing. And sometimes, they want the seller to do it, because most of the time the seller wants to negotiate that.
Well, then check the box that the buyer will pay after closing and let them change it when they execute the form on the buying end. Put it the way that's going to be the advantage to your seller, and then they'll change it if they don't want it to be that way.
Okay.
I see that all the time when I'm working with condos.
Yes.
Well, yeah, for 21 years, I've never signed it, but okay.
So, but as to Larry's point that he made, it's best to upload this as part of your seller's docs so that the buyer then has that document to be able to submit with the offer, their terms. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I always attach it on the MLS,
Right,
but it's not completely filled out because there's boxes for the buyer to check.
Any other comments, questions?
okay. Since there's not a lot of any comments or questions, Janine, do you have the new buyer's form? We can go over that since we have time today.
Sure, absolutely. All right. Give me 1 second. I'm
And
pulling.
this is Al. I'll make a stab at a question.
Sure.
On 10A, if a condo is over a certain age, it is required. So if an inspection has been done and there's no need, so the phase 1 has been done, but there's no need for a phase 2. In other words, there's no follow-up, there was no engineering issues, things of that nature. So I'm assuming that only A is required, and really there's nothing else to check.
And you've been through it, I've been through it, Al, and you know that you have your SIRS in there, which is important for the new buyer, so that they can look at the longevity of each component that was given by whoever did the inspection, the cost to replace, et cetera, and then recommended maintenance fees as to the SIRS report, which there's 4 options depending on what company that you use.
Right. I've downloaded every single thing in our portal for our community, which includes what repairs were done. So I have all that.
Perfect.
So I'm just assuming that if it's a brand new community, it is not required. And if a community is over a certain age, then A is selected and is required.
Correct.
Providing that it has been completed. As
Providing
it's
what?
required.
Right. If it's been completed, correct.
Right.
Okay.
And then, but the seller still would need to disclose B and C as well.
Right. And the turnover, like we said, is going to be very rare. And for those of you that are selling like new construction in downtown St. Pete, you won't even be using this contract. They're going to give you a developer contract, but they're going to have these requirements in there, and it's going to talk about the turnover. This is primarily going to apply to, again, like I mentioned earlier, when somebody does a conversion, it's an older property, and they're waiting for it to hit that 70%. It's usually 70%. Ownership, then the developer turns it over to the association in ownership. So that's mainly where that's going to apply. We're going to see a little bit of that.
Reality is sellers are not going to understand this language.
That's exactly right.
There's no way. I mean, if we have a hard time understanding it, they're certainly not going to understand it. Now, I took this form to our condo association, our management company, and did get some guidance on it. And they were surprised by the new form because they haven't even seen it yet. So, but at least they're aware of it. They're aware of it now.
And that's one of the reasons that we're saying that if the seller doesn't understand the question or they don't know the answer, they do need to call the association rather than guessing on it. And we as agents should not be directing them because it's disclosure, not ours.
It's really difficult.
Yeah.
Okay.
It is out, but I mean, most of I have to say, the good management companies, the ones that are out there, and most of the condo associations, again, you're in a larger complex, I'm in a smaller, we've created portals where they have all this information to access so that the management company's not constantly, having to supply this information.
Yeah, but they're not going to put this form in that portal, I wouldn't think.
No, but the information from the milestone and the
That's all there. Yeah,
all those documents will be there.
right. I've got all that.
Right.
Okay.
And then, the SERS is part of the milestone. So that's going to be there as well.
Right.
Because I think Barrel did the majority, and in the Barrel, it goes over the structure, shows the pictures, etc. You passed, you didn't pass, longevity of each component, their recommendation of cost replacement, and then what they recommend so that the new purchaser can take a look and see what they're recommending increases on maintenance fees, which most of them, if they pass phase one and have life, are somewhere around 2 to 3% increase year over year from the ones I've seen.
Okay.
So it'd be good information for a buyer to have when they're, trying to make an informed decision about, long-term purchase. Any other questions on this or?
Okay. We can always come back if we need to, if you think of something while I'm going over. We did make a change in app files in reference to our buyer disclosure, Metro buyer disclosure, and Metro sellers disclosure. Just a very easy, quick change. We took out on the buyers, this is the Metro buyers disclosure. We took out the COVID. So the COVID stuff is no longer there. That's the only change on that one. And then on the sellers. Can you guys see the sellers? Did it flip over? No?
Yeah.
It did? Okay. And on the sellers, we took out the COVID. Okay, the COVID is no longer there. We did add that the brokerage commission, in addition to the commission to be paid by the seller, you agree to pay Remax Metro commission of $275 at closing. You will have no obligation to pay if closing does not occur. So we have added the brokerage commission of $275 on the seller's disclosure as well, in addition to it being on the listing agreement. And that's the only change on that form. So that's all I have.
Hey, Janine,
Yes.
so you don't think the seller's gonna get confused on that 275, thinking that that's all they're gonna pay for commission?
Yeah, you'll just need to explain it to them. That's the same 275 that's on the listing agreement.
Can we call it what it is though, a transaction fee instead of commission?
Sure.
I mean, if I was a seller, I'd see $275 for commission, that's what I'm gonna pay.
Give me 1 second.
Brokerage commission.
It says in addition to the commission. So in addition to the commission to be paid by seller. So in addition to the commission that's in the listing agreement, it says you agree to pay a commission, but of $275 at closing.
It should be called a transaction fee to Remax Metro.
That's what I think too, but
I believe in the beginning, when we first started adding this information, and I'll double check that with Rick, but this is the same language that was on the Metro buyer. It's the exact same language.
We couldn't call it a transaction fee because that's what the whole suit was over.
That's
So it had
exactly
to be
right.
called
There
a
is a
commission.
problem with calling it a transaction fee. It has to be a commission.
Yeah.
Unless that has changed, Sally, do you know the rules on that?
Yeah, I think other brokerages are avoiding calling it a transaction fee.
Yeah. And that is, I mean, when we first, it's been what, 10 years since we've had the brokerage commission? the additional brokerage commission, so you might call it a transaction fee when you're explaining it to the seller, but we have to be careful about that because we were not allowed at that time to call it a transaction fee.
I tell them what the total amount is for the commission, and I say that includes
Yes,
a commission portion that goes directly to Remax.
yes.
And I never have anybody even push back on it. I've been,
Yeah, yeah, that's a good way to do it, just, so Anthony, I don't know if that answered your question, but like I said, it's the exact same language that was drawn up by the attorney when we added this back in, well, it was several years ago.
And
Is
I
there a
think
way to
you
do
can-
that without having the line underneath so it looks like it's just pre-printed? Because that way you can say, look, I can't even change this form. I didn't put that in. It's part of.
Yeah, we can do that.
You just take the underlined out, that should be.
We can change that out.
Just
That's
take the
a great
underline
idea.
out. But,
Yeah, we can change that.
okay.
put in the hard 275 number there.
Yeah, just hard coded in.
Yeah.
The reason we don't hard code it is because some of you charge more than 275, and so that number needs to be changed, but it is automatically added as 275, but we allow you to change it so that you can add some agents charge 400. So, okay.
Very well. Up to you. Just a suggestion.
Yeah, and I will pull the line out. That's no problem.
Okay.
Good suggestion. Anybody else have anything else that you want to discuss? Sallie, I know, do you have anything from compliance?
Just a reminder that on the flood disclosure, when the seller signs, you don't need to fill in the date for the buyer's receipt. That happens as part of the offer when you provide it to the buyer.
Okay, so in other words, when the flood disclosure is being filled out, the seller is doing their disclosure, the listing agent should not be filling out the stuff in the box, because that is for the buyer's agent to fill out, that the buyer has received a copy of it, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Sallie, I have to give you a compliment. You're driving me crazy with this over the top compliance. And I know Janine said that, the rules and our attention to detail has been waning over the years, and you're trying to help get us back up, and you're the spearhead of all that. And sometimes you get me really irritated with, this is the fourth time I've had this form, what the F? But you're always so sweet and pleasant when you reply. And I'm sure that takes a tremendous amount of energy on your part. And I do want to say thank you very much for your attention to that and helping us to become more compliant so that going forward, the job will be much easier for all of us. But thank you for being so pleasant all the time.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm here to help you. I don't want to be a thorn in your side.
Well, when we've got that learning curve, it feels that way. But and I feel like I'm more compliant than probably some of the folks out there. And I'm like, why am I getting dinged so much? Because I try to be as low key as I can, but I've been getting it lately with good, some regularity. So, but you're always so pleasant, and I just really wanted to say thank you for that.
Thank you.
Lori, you have a question? Go for
I
it.
do. I was just based on Sallie, what you just said about that, that the buyer checks that box. Whenever I have the disclosure in the MLS attachments, it's kind of like with the condo disclosure. I check that box that buyer has received it because it's in the attachments. So I'm trying to save another roundabout of having a checkbox of this or that. So I've had good luck with that, because what happens is they see that they've already got the disclosure. So the 3 days starts right then because they've got it. It's in the MLS attachments, and it creates the agent to have to use the ones that are included there rather than they don't look and then they come back to me and this and that. So when they see that they've already received it, basically there, it's like, oh, because it's right there in the attachments. Is that okay?
Yeah, so if you have provided all of those documents that are set out, and yeah, then you could certainly say, buyer, you've already received it.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Mhm.
And one more quick, probably really stupid question is when you're like, let's say for the condo, and again, I just have to go over these a million times in my head. For the condo, let's say your condo is not 3 stories. Is it if it's under 3 stories, do you have to deal with any of this at all as far as how far it is away from the water or how old it is? Let's say how old it is. So is it a 3 stories or a 3 stories or?
It's and. Is that right, Larry and Janine? It's
Yeah.
and, right?
3 stories and
Yeah.
above.
Yes.
Meaning if it's only 2 stories, but it's 50 years old, they still have to have these inspections?
No.
No.
That's what,
they-
okay, that's what I mean. So
Yeah.
if it's under 3 stories, you don't have to worry about the other criteria. That's right.
3
Correct.
stories or above. Mhm.
Correct.
Yeah.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that again.
That brings up another question.
Do they
In-
count lower, do they count parking on the first level as the first story?
I think they do.
For example, my building is parking underneath and then 3 stories, so that's 3 stories. The bottom level's parking and condo lockers, it's not livable space. So that's 3 stories and above.
All right,
So
that
but
brings
that
up
wouldn't be,
Wait,
for the milestone, that wouldn't be considered 4 stories?
no, it's 3 stories.
Okay. So they're only counting living space.
Right. I know in ours they referenced it as a 3 stories and above, and mine's that scenario, parking underneath and then three stories. But
Could we check that? Because I've heard people talking about that first parking story is also structurally needs to be structurally integrous, et cetera. So people that I have spoken to include that. So could we check that?
we can check it. I mean, obviously, when you have that, you've got your support beams. It is structural, it is part of the structure itself and holds the structure up. So it's like in my report, when they did that, they checked those supporting beams underneath and columns and any plumbing that may be running through, some.
So does it count as a story is where I'm going with that.
I don't think it does.
So
Okay.
Larry, can I argue with you?
Yeah.
Um, of course, I'm in a complex that's only 2 stories high, but we had just threw the scenario out if we ever had to rebuild a building of having parking under the 2 buildings. That parking area does count as 3 and above, according to the integrity reports. But I'm with Laurie. I think that is the case. But if we could get someone just to verify it,
We
that
will,
would be
Sure,
great.
we'll get some clarity on it and then we'll send it out to everybody, okay?
Yeah.
Awesome.
I'll go through some of I have various ones from different companies.
Yeah. Larry, like I live in a townhome style, but we're a condominium. And we have 3 living stories and the bottom floor is a garage and a bonus room. That's not supposed to be occupied. And they said we were 4 stories. So, we did the milestone. But they
And that
counted us at 4 stories. They counted the garage and the bonus room as a level.
And it may depend on the structural engineering or architecture firm that's doing it. I know, like I said, Beryl has done the majority in this area, but we'll get clarification on that for you.
And also, because I'm gonna back up out to that 275, taking the line out. I will need to get clarification because that for that language and that part of that form was written by the attorney, so I just want to make sure there's no issues with taking that line out, because it might be that was to draw attention rather than not draw attention to it. So I'll find out, and then we'll also let you know about that too, and I will make that change if they give me the approval, okay?
Understood. Also, I wanted to say that in condo buildings over in Isla, there are towers, and then there are other buildings that are just two
Mhm.
stories.
Mhm.
So if you're in the section that's 2 stories, how do we go about that as far as this form goes?
That's a great point.
Would that not fall under not required?
That's what I'm wondering. I'm wondering if part of the community has the high tower of 12 stories, but then you have the offshoots of it that are 2 stories. And the
Those are
bottom,
not all the
and the
same
bottom,
association, so they're probably, I'm sure they're separate.
yeah, I don't know. I was just wondering.
I had one in Isla that was in the villas, the 2-story, and the tower is included in their condo definition. So they did a milestone on both buildings.
Interesting. You just,
Yeah,
because I know those buildings don't have parking underneath on those.
right.
Right.
They were just 2-story.
But they did a lot of repairs on the parking garage, the walkways.
Could I ask, could it be a situation if it's separate condo associations, would they maybe not need the milestone, but need the SERS because of the common elements that they might share in one master condo association, if I explained that correctly?
I don't, if you were, let's say you, like you're referring to as a master, and then you had 2 stories and above, it would be, did they apply it to the 2 stories?
I guess what I was asking, if each building has its own association, the ones under 2 stories or 2 stories and below may not need a milestone, but the SERS possibly because there's a master association, if that's the right term, that might cover, say, the pool and the tennis courts, then they would need the SERS for the reserves because those are shared, I guess is what I was asking.
Possibility. That's what we need to get clarity on that. We get clarity from attorneys on that one. I would think that if it's under the master, so let's say there's a master association, that's what you're saying, right, Bill? There's a master association, and the master association had a SERS report done. Now, was the SERS report done on just in reference to the 3-story and above? Or was it done on the units that were 2-story?
Yeah, well, I would be guessing that all those that financial information and how healthy it is would pertain to assessments that could affect the 2-story units for, say, like I said, the pool, common elements, things like that. But for structure, you would only, for the milestone for the structure, they would only be interested in your particular building, which may be 2 stories only.
Correct. And in that scenario, I'm not 100% sure if, say, somebody like Beryl, they say this is a tower, and then you got, like you're saying, then 2-story units. They're slab on grade, 2 stories, no parking underneath. Was that included?
Yes, I guess that'd be my question, meaning that you could check, the box that doesn't require a milestone, but you may have to check or deliver the SERS report still. They're not connected, meaning like the milestone may not apply, but the SERS could possibly apply.
Possibly. I think it would be rare, but do you have a certain complex that you're thinking of that this would apply to?
No, I heard the other person speaking of the scenario they were saying where there was towers and then there were also 2-story units, but I don't have any personal dealings with a property like that.
Al, do you know, you were referencing, like, I'm assuming you're referencing like Palma. are those the towers and then the other units, are those two different associations? Do you know?
I don't remember. I don't remember. It's been a while. I mean, I've sold several in the lower units over there, but I feel like I opened up a can of worms. Sorry about that.
Something we
I'm
can
sorry, I
check.
didn't mean to ask a weirdly obscure question just for the sake of asking. It just made me think of that. That's all.
Sure. I mean, there's no dumb question. You know, it's something that we can look into for you. Sally, do you have any thoughts on that from the legal side?
I'm gonna need to look into some of these issues that have come up.
Right. Okay, so we'll check into those things for you.
All right, so all this gives me agita time. So not to beat a dead horse, I thought we've always been told it's 3-story or less. Is that the same scenario? Or are you telling me 2-story or less?
Did you hear Anthony, Larry?
I did not. It was, I guess I got an unstable internet connection.
No, I was
Okay.
just asking, we're always told it's 3 stories or less. Is that still the case, or is it 2-story or less?
Janine, if you can hear him, I
Is
can't.
it 3 stories or less or 2 stories or less for the required milestone?
3 stories and above.
All right, that confuses me. So is it
If
1,
it
2,
has
3?
are you saying if it has 3 stories, does it need that milestone?
Correct.
Yes, it does. Anything 3 stories or above requires a milestone.
Okay.
Anybody else? Okay, we'll wrap it up if there's no other questions.
I have a question and
Yeah,
I
we
put it in the chat. If someone could
Oh,
go
gosh.
back to the as-is form and explain item number 15 to me in more detail. I'm
Give me
just
one
need some
second. All right, give me 1 second and I'll go back to it.
Was it
I
about?
think in paragraph
Providing
15, I
default.
believe there was only a clause that had been removed.
Yeah,
And it was wasn't it where the buyer, Larry?
I'm
it's
trying
when
to
the
pull
buyer
up the
defaults.
red line real quick on that one.
Yeah, if the buyer defaults, what it previously said is if the listing agent retains a portion of the deposit that goes to the seller, then the buyer's agent is entitled to 50% of that.
Right.
So now that is gone. So the buyer's agent would not be entitled to a portion of the deposit that's retained by the seller and the listing agent.
That's correct. And the listing broker will now be able to retain it without splitting it with the
And isn't that based on how the listing agreement reads or how the buyer brokerage reads?
It's based on the listing agreement. You're absolutely correct.
Okay,
So
and
if
then
you
also,
have 50% in the listing
Okay.
agreement that you're able to collect 50% of the deposit that the seller is to retain.
Mhm.
Then for the cancellation, then it would go to you. And before they took that paragraph out, it said that we had to split it with the buyer agent or the buyer broker.
Right.
okay. Understood. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, any other questions?
Yeah, let me check the chat because it seemed I need to. All right. What is the turnover inspection report? Okay, and when would it be required? Rebecca, are you clear on that or do we need to go over that again? She must have gotten off. Okay. As is, we got that. How are the structural integrity report and milestone reports different? So that's a good one, Larry.
Okay. What they do is they come out, they look at the major components of the building,
So
okay?
which one, the milestone or the structural?
The milestone is, the structural is part of the milestone report. So they're gonna come out, they're gonna look at the major components of the condominium. Your roof, pool, anything structural, they're gonna take a look at. Fire, equipment, the list goes on and on. So they're looking for the main components, your roof, what's the life of your roof, that sort of thing. So when they do the milestone, they're doing a structural, as my understanding, they're doing a structural integrity report. Or they're looking to see if they have to go to phase two, which would be they found some issues that they want to dig a little deeper, by maybe digging into the building a little bit more, getting into the roof, those sorts of things, which there have been some, but not very many. So the structural portion is done as part of the milestone inspection, if that answers your question.
And then what about SIRS? Can you explain
What
that
they
in more
do is,
detail?
it's when they completed the milestone inspection, all the components of the building, they're going to list out what they see is the life of those components. Based upon the life of the components, they're going to look at your reserves and see if based upon the life and the cost to replace, do you have enough in reserve to meet that? Or is your maintenance fee on track to fund those components at the end of the day? So there was a piece in there that I was not aware of. I felt that we all were going to have to fully fund. We were going to see astronomical maintenance fees, but they did throw in option 4, which kept the maintenance fees fairly low based upon it. And it's language I don't have in front of me, but essentially what it said was that if 60% of the ownership voted to waive fully funding, then they could assess. And that's what we did because we didn't want to take our maintenance fee astronomically high and not make it, appealing to the market, so to speak. So actually, in my scenario, by going that route, we could have reduced our maintenance fee by approximately $100 a month, but we elected to keep it where it is to keep it going to the funding. So those are going to be the SIRS. That's the SIRS part of the inspection. So to kind of summarize it, they're going to look at the components. They're going to give you the life. They're going to give you the estimated cost to replace at the end of the life. And then they're going to give you 4 scenarios of fully funding, partially funding, waiving, etc. in the SIRS report. Did I answer your question?
Yes. Yes, thank you.
You're welcome, Lisa. Anybody else? Okay, just one last reminder. Don't forget, kickoff meeting is going to be on January 21st, 10 a.m. We appreciate all of you
And
joining
that will be
today.
via Zoom.
Yeah, it will be via Zoom. And we appreciate all of you guys joining today. Sallie for joining in. And if you have any questions, reach out to your leadership team. We'll be glad to answer any further questions you may have. Hope you guys have a outstanding day. Thanks for joining.
Thank you. Bye.